The last golden rays of the setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Elara slumped in the saddle of her weary mare Buttercup, the rhythmic creak of worn leather a familiar lullaby to her exhaustion. Harmony Gulch emerged from the dusty haze, a scattering of weathered wooden buildings clinging to the edge of a winding dirt road. A faint scent of wood smoke and something vaguely like stale beer drifted on the dry air. Her stomach rumbled, a hollow ache that had become a constant companion these past weeks. She hadn't eaten a full meal in days, her meager rations dwindling to nothing but a few dried berries she'd foraged. Her fingers instinctively went to the cool, smooth surface of the silver ring on her right hand. It was her grandmother's, a delicate filigree of intertwined vines with a small, unassuming sapphire nestled at its heart. The last tangible piece of her past, a tangible link to a world that now felt impossibly distant. She'd promised herself she'd never part with it, but desperation gnawed at her resolve. Buttercup, sensing their destination, picked up her pace, her hooves stirring miniature dust devils as they entered the main street. A few men lounged outside a saloon, their laughter echoing unnervingly in the twilight. Elara kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. She knew what she had to do. The ring was her only hope. The thought made her throat constrict, a hot wave of shame washing over her. To sell off her grandmother's legacy for a loaf of bread, but what choice did she have? She couldn't let Buttercup starve, and she certainly couldn't starve herself. With a heavy sigh, she dismounted in front of a building that boasted a faded sign proclaiming it Abernathy's General Store and Mercantile. The bell above the door jangled raucously as she pushed it open, announcing her presence. The air inside was thick with the mingled scents of spices, lamp oil, and something vaguely metallic. Shelves crammed from floor to ceiling overflowed with an assortment of goods, bolts of fabric, sacks of flour, tools, and jars of pickled vegetables. Behind a long wooden counter stood a portly man with a bushy mustache and an apron stained with what looked suspiciously like molasses. His eyes, small and shrewd, narrowed as they took her in, lingering on her travel-worn clothes and the exhaustion etched on her face. "Evening, miss," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice a low rumble. "What can I do for you?" Elara's voice caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Good evening, sir. I was hoping you might be interested in purchasing something." Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the ring from her finger, the sapphire glinting faintly in the dim lamplight. It felt impossibly light in her palm, yet held the weight of all her hopes. Elara clutched the small velvet pouch tightly, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. The aroma of stale coffee and something faintly medicinal hung in the air of Mr. Abernathy's cramped general store. Her gaze darted from the cluttered shelves, overflowing with everything from coiled rope to tins of peaches to the gruff man behind the counter. He had a face like sun-baked leather and eyes that seemed to take in every detail, yet betrayed no warmth. "So, what'll it be, girl?" Mr. Abernathy's voice was a gravelly rumble. He'd been watching her since she entered, a silent, unnerving assessment. Taking a deep breath, Elara slid the pouch across the scarred wooden counter. It seemed to travel an impossibly long distance. I have this," She pushed it a little further, her voice barely a whisper. With trembling fingers, she untied the drawstring and tipped out her mother's wedding ring. The gold band, delicate and intricately engraved, glinted faintly in the dim light filtering through the dusty window. It was the last tangible link to a life that felt 1,000 miles and a lifetime away. Mr. Abernathy picked it up, turning it over in his calloused fingers. His brow, already furrowed, deepened. He gave a short, dismissive snort. "Gold? What good is gold out here, girl?" He dropped it back onto the counter with a dull thud. "We ain't got no banks to speak of. No jewelers. Folks need flour, beans, kerosene. A good plow, maybe, not baubles." He pushed the ring back towards her, a finality in the gesture that crushed Alara's fragile hope. "Gold is no good here." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. The last flicker of warmth in the pit of her stomach extinguished, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. Her lifeline, her last resort, had just been declared worthless. What now? The image of the empty wagon, the gnawing hunger, the vast, unforgiving landscape outside flooded her mind. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her. She felt a sudden dizzying wave of despair. But I need supplies," she stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I need food. I need to keep moving." Her eyes pleaded with him, searching for any flicker of understanding, any hint of compassion. "I can work. I'm strong. I've worked on my father's farm since I was small. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need." Her voice grew stronger, desperation lending it a raw edge. "I'm not afraid of hard work. Please, Mr. Abernathy, just for a few days' wages, enough to get me back on my feet." She looked at her hands, calloused and capable despite their trembling. "I can earn my keep." Mr. Abernathy just grunted, his gaze drifting over her, then beyond, to the dusty road outside. "Ain't got much call for extra hands in the store, girl. Not for gold, and not for promises." He picked up a ledger, effectively closing the conversation, leaving Alara stranded in a sudden, suffocating silence. The ring lay on the counter, a mocking symbol of her utter helplessness. The bell above the general store door jangled, a surprisingly delicate sound for the man who entered. Silas Boone filled the doorway, his silhouette a solid block against the dusty afternoon light. He stood well over 6 feet, his shoulders wide beneath a worn denim jacket, and a Stetson hat, shaded eyes that missed little. A heavy scent of saddle leather and pipe smoke followed him, a familiar and reassuring aroma to the townsfolk, but one that made Alara instinctively shrink further behind the counter. She was still explaining her predicament to Mr. Abernathy, her voice soft but firm. "I understand, Mr. Abernathy. I just hoped I could earn my keep, perhaps. I'm a hard worker, truly." She gestured vaguely at the meager supplies she'd been hoping to trade for. Silas didn't move, merely leaned against the doorframe, a silent observer. His gaze, though not directly on Alara, seemed to encompass her, the store, and the conversation in its entirety. He'd heard the tale of the pawned ring, the desperation in the young woman's voice, and the shopkeeper's polite but firm refusal. Abernathy was a good man, but practicality ruled his world. Mr. Abernathy sighed, rubbing a hand over his balding head. "Alara, I wish I could, but business is slow, and I simply don't have an opening. Perhaps you could try the saloon. They always need—" He trailed off, realizing the implication. Ilara's cheeks flushed, and she clutched the rough fabric of her skirt. "No, thank you, sir." Her voice, though quiet, held a steely edge. Silas pushed off the doorframe, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He approached the counter slowly, his boots thudding softly on the wooden planks. Ilara flinched, her eyes widening as the imposing rancher drew near. His face was weathered, etched with the lines of sun and wind, and his expression was unreadable. He stopped a few feet from her, hands hooked into his belt loops. "You looking for work, miss?" His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle for a man of his build. Ilara swallowed, her gaze flickering to Mr. Abernathy, who now stood straighter, a look of surprise on his face. "Yes, sir. Anything honest." Silas's eyes, the color of a stormy sky, finally settled on her. They were discerning, assessing, but not unkind. "Can you cook? Real food, not just fancy parlor tricks." "Yes, sir. My mother taught me. Hearty meals, plenty of them." She felt a flicker of hope, a warmth spreading through her chilled limbs. "And mending? My bunkhouse crew tears through clothes faster than a prairie fire." Ilara nodded, her hands instinctively going to the neat stitches on her own worn dress. "I'm good with a needle and thread, sir. Very good." Silas considered her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. "I need a cook and a mender at the Bar M Ranch. Room and board, honest pay. You interested?" Ilara's breath caught. It was a lifeline, flung unexpectedly from the most unlikely of sources. "Yes, sir. More than interested. I'd be very grateful." Her voice trembled with relief. Silas nodded, a curt, decisive gesture. "Be at the ranch by sunup tomorrow. Ask for Boone. Don't be late." He turned and walked out, the bell jingling a second time, leaving Ilara staring at the empty doorway, a newfound lightness in her chest. Ilara's breath hitched, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest. "Yes," she managed, the single word thick with gratitude and a tremor of disbelief. "Yes, Mr. Boone, I'll work for you." The relief that washed over her was so potent it almost brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized how tightly wound she was until the tension began to unravel. Silas gave a curt nod, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if weighing her sincerity. "Good. Gather your things." Her things amounted to the worn carpet bag by her feet, containing little more than a spare dress and a few precious mementos. She picked it up, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Silas led her out of the essay office, the midday sun momentarily blinding after the dim interior. Her mare, a sturdy if slightly sway-backed animal, was tethered alongside Silas's powerful roan. He untied her horse, then swung himself into his saddle with an effortless grace that belied his imposing frame. "Can you ride?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. "Yes, sir," she replied, climbing onto her mare. The familiar creak of leather under her felt like a distant echo of a happier time. They rode out of Silver Creek, the town quickly shrinking behind them, its dusty streets and desperate faces fading from view. The landscape opened up, vast and untamed. Rolling hills, crowned with resilient pines, stretched towards distant, jagged mountains. The air grew cleaner, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. Ilara kept her eyes on the horizon, occasionally glancing at Silas. He rode with an economical stillness, his gaze scanning the terrain, missing nothing. He didn't speak, and Alara found herself appreciating the quiet, a stark contrast to the clamor of her recent past. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour or two, the land began to change. The hills softened, and scattered pockets of greener grass appeared. Then, in the distance, a cluster of buildings emerged, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the landscape. It was the Bar M Ranch. As they drew closer, the ranch revealed itself as a small, self-contained world. A large, well-maintained main house, built of sturdy timber and stone, dominated the cluster. Around it stood several outbuildings, a massive barn, corrals teeming with horses, a blacksmith's forge, and what looked like bunkhouses. The scale of it all was daunting, a testament to Silas Boone's industry and success. Alara felt a fresh wave of apprehension mingle with her hope. This wasn't just a job. It was an entirely new life, a chasm away from anything she'd known. Silas dismounted at the main house, his boots thudding softly on the packed earth. "This is it," he said, his voice flat. He gestured towards the house. "Your room's inside. We'll talk about your duties after you've settled." Alara slid off her mare, her legs stiff. The house, though large, exuded a quiet warmth. A wide porch ran along the front, adorned with 2 rocking chairs. A faint smell of wood smoke and something baking wafted from within. Stepping onto the porch, Alara felt a strange sense of both trepidation and anticipation. This massive, solitary ranch, overseen by its equally solitary owner, now held her future. The first rays of dawn, sharp and cold, were Alara's new alarm clock. Her muscles, still protesting the previous day's labor, ached with a dull throb as she swung her legs out of the narrow cot. The air in the bunkhouse kitchen was already thick with the scent of wood smoke and brewing coffee, a testament to Silas's early start. Alara was quickly learning that the rhythm of the ranch was dictated by the sun and the hungry mouths it needed to feed. Her initial days were a blur of demanding chores. Hauling water from the well, the bucket handles biting into her palms, was an early morning ritual. Then came the arduous task of preparing breakfast. Mountains of flapjacks, thick slices of bacon sizzling in a cast-iron skillet, and pots of strong black coffee that could wake the dead. The ranch hands, a boisterous and hungry lot, devoured her creations with an efficiency that bordered on alarming. By the time the last plate was scraped clean, Alara was already planning lunch, her mind ticking through ingredients, portions, and cooking times. Mending became another significant part of her day. The men's clothes, torn from rough work and thorny bushes, piled up on a worn wooden table in the corner of the kitchen. With a needle and thread, Alara patched denim, stitched up frayed cuffs, and replaced missing buttons, her fingers growing nimble with practice. She found a quiet satisfaction in transforming ragged garments back into something serviceable, a small act of repair in a world that often felt broken. One afternoon, Silas found her meticulously darning a sock, her brow furrowed in concentration. He leaned against the doorframe, his imposing figure filling the space. "Those hands of yours," he rumbled, his voice deeper than the lowest note on a cello, "they ain't so soft anymore." Alara glanced up, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Her hands, once delicate, were indeed rougher now, crisscrossed with small nicks and calluses. "They're stronger, Mr. Boone," she replied, her voice soft but firm. He grunted, a sound that could mean anything. Good. Weak hands don't last long out here. He didn't offer praise, not directly, but Ilara felt a flicker of something akin to approval in his gaze before he turned and disappeared back into the relentless demands of the ranch. As the weeks bled into a month, Ilara found a strange, unexpected comfort in the predictability of her days. The physical exhaustion was immense, but it was a different kind of tired than the gnawing anxiety that had once consumed her. Here, her labor had a tangible result: full bellies, mended clothes, a semblance of order in the chaos of ranch life. She was more than just a survivor. She was a contributor. In the rhythmic chop of vegetables, the hiss of frying meat, and the steady rhythm of her needle, Ilara Vance was, for the first time in a long while, beginning to feel truly useful. Her hands were hard, yes, but her heart, surprisingly, felt full. The sky, a brilliant, unrelenting blue just an hour ago, curdled into a bruised purple-black. A low, guttural rumble started in the west, growing steadily louder until it felt less like thunder and more like the earth itself groaning. The wind, initially a playful whip, transformed into a malevolent force, tearing at anything not nailed down. Ilara, sweeping the dust from the porch, watched in stunned silence as the first fat drops of rain splattered against the dry earth, instantly turning it dark. "Storm's coming in fast." Silas's voice, usually a steady rumble, was sharp with urgency as he strode from the barn, pulling his wide-brimmed hat lower against the sudden onslaught. "Everyone, get the stock into the lower pastures, secure the gates. This ain't no summer shower." The ranch hands, already scrambling, moved with renewed haste. The air grew thick with flying grit and the smell of ozone. Lightning cracked, a jagged white scar across the tumultuous sky, followed by an immediate, deafening clap of thunder that vibrated through Ilara's bones. Rain began to fall in sheets, blurring the familiar landscape into a watercolor smudge. The wind howled, a banshee shriek that drowned out all other sounds. From the barn, Ilara heard the terrified whinnies of horses and the lowing of cattle. The gates to the main corrals shuddered under the wind's assault. One of the hands, a young man named Jesse, wrestled with a flapping canvas tarp that had ripped free from the hayshed, nearly getting knocked off his feet. "Ilara, inside now!" Silas yelled, his voice barely audible over the din. He was already mounted on his sturdy bay, cutting a path towards the panicked herd. But before she could obey, a frantic bellow tore through the storm. A section of the fence to the north pasture, weakened by rot, had given way. A dozen steers, driven by primal fear, bolted into the open range, disappearing into the torrential downpour. Silas reined in his horse, his face grim. "Damn it all!" he shouted, his gaze sweeping over the chaos. "We need every able body. Jesse, take the south fence. Mark, you and Clay head east. We can't lose this many. Ilara!" She flinched as he turned his piercing gaze on her, rain plastering strands of hair to his weathered face. "Can you ride?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for argument or hesitation. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't ridden since a lifetime ago. But the desperate urgency in Silas's eyes, the sight of the scattering cattle, pushed past her fear. "Yes, Mr. Boone," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Good. Get to the stable. Grab that bay mare, the one with the white blaze." She's spirited, but steady. Head out towards the creek bed, see if you can turn any strays back, and stay safe." With a fierce nod, Silas spurred his own horse, vanishing into the driving rain, a lone silhouette against the storm's fury. Ilara didn't wait. The thought of those animals lost, of Silas's ranch suffering, propelled her forward. She ran, the wind trying to rip her from her feet, towards the stable, her decision made. The wind, a banshee wailing, tore at the barn doors, threatening to rip them from their hinges. Rain hammered against the tin roof, a relentless drumming that drowned out all other sounds. Silas, his face etched with concern, paced the length of the aisle. "3 calves, gone," he muttered, his gaze sweeping over the remaining skittish herd. "Too young for this kind of weather." Ilara, who had been quietly mending a tear in a feed sack, looked up, her expression a mix of apprehension and resolve. She'd always found storms unsettling, a vivid reminder of the night she'd lost everything. But the thought of those small, vulnerable creatures alone in the deluge stirred something deeper than fear. "I can help look," she offered, her voice small but firm against the storm's roar. Silas stopped, turning to face her. His eyes, usually a steely gray, held a flicker of surprise. "It's no night for a woman out there, Ilara. The creek will be swollen, and visibility is 0. "I'm not afraid," she insisted, though a tremor ran through her. "I know the North Pasture. I've walked it enough times." She rose, pulling the heavy canvas slicker Silas had lent her tighter around her slender frame. The slicker, meant for a man twice her size, was still better than nothing. She grabbed a lantern, its weak glow a tiny defiance against the encroaching gloom. Silas studied her for a moment, his stern features unreadable. He saw not just the fear in her eyes, but the determined set of her jaw. "Stay close," he finally grunted, grabbing his own lantern and a coil of rope. "And don't take risks." Stepping out into the maelstrom was like entering another world. The wind immediately tried to snatch the lantern from Ilara's grip, and the rain, cold and stinging, plastered her hair to her face. Mud sucked at her boots with every step. She fought the urge to cower, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Which way?" she shouted over the storm's fury, her voice barely audible. Silas pointed north, his hand a bulky silhouette in the driving rain. "They often huddle near the old oak. Might have sought shelter there." They pushed on, leaning into the wind, their lanterns swaying erratically. The world was a blur of gray and black. The only sounds the relentless rain and the wind's mournful cries. Ilara's heart pounded, a drumbeat in her ears, but she kept moving, her eyes scanning the indistinct landscape. It was Ilara who spotted them first, a huddle of dark shapes beneath the gnarled branches of the ancient oak. 3 calves, shivering and soaked, bawling softly. "There," she yelled, pointing, relief washing over her. She didn't wait for Silas, but immediately began to coax the frightened animals. "Come on, little ones," she murmured, her voice surprisingly gentle amidst the chaos. She knelt, ignoring the mud soaking through her trousers, and slowly extended a hand. One brave calf, barely more than a year old, cautiously nudged her palm. Ilara began to lead it, her steps slow and deliberate, back towards the faint light of the barn. The other 2, encouraged, followed. Silas watched from a few yards back. His expression softened, a subtle shift in his usually unyielding gaze. He saw her patience, her quiet courage, the way she put the animal's safety above her own discomfort. She wasn't just a hired hand. She was a force, a gentle strength in the face of the storm. As they finally herded the last calf into the warmth of the barn, dripping but safe, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The gold ring Alara had tried to pawn for food seemed a distant memory, insignificant against the value of what he had just witnessed. The dawn broke with a chill that cut sharper than usual, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. Twisted branches littered the yard like discarded bones, and a section of the stable roof sagged precariously, a gaping maw against the morning light. Ranch hands, their faces etched with exhaustion, moved with a practiced slowness, assessing the damage. The storm had passed, but its fury lingered in the splintered wood and scattered debris. Ilara, despite her own weariness, was already tending to a mare that had foaled prematurely during the tempest. Her hands, surprisingly gentle, stroked the shivering newborn while she murmured soft assurances. Silas watched her from the stable entrance, a steaming mug of coffee clutched in his large hands. He'd seen plenty of storms, plenty of greenhorns crumble under pressure. Alara, however, had moved through the chaos with a quiet determination that had surprised him. She hadn't complained, hadn't faltered, just done what needed doing. He approached, his boots crunching softly on the hay-strewn floor. Alara looked up, her eyes, still a little wide from the night's ordeal, meeting his. A faint smudge of dirt marred her cheek, and strands of hair had escaped her braid. "The little one's strong, Mr. Boone," she said, her voice a little raspy. "Just needs warmth and a bit of extra care." Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "You did good, Ilara. Better than good. You kept a clear head when others were losing theirs." He paused, taking a slow sip of coffee. "That mare would have lost her foal without you. And those calves in the south pasture, you found them, brought them in before the worst hit. Saved them all." A blush crept up Ilara's neck. I saw what needed to be done." She looked away, her gaze settling on the tiny foal. "Anyone would have." "No, Alara, not anyone." Silas's voice dropped, losing its usual gruff edge. "Most folks would have panicked. Most folks would have thought of their own hides first. You thought of the animals, of the ranch. You stood your ground." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "What you did last night, it was worth more than any gold ring." He saw her flinch slightly at the mention of the ring, a memory of desperation flickering in her eyes. He pressed on, his voice firm but kind. "This isn't a temporary arrangement anymore, Ilara. This ranch needs you. I need you. I'm offering you a steady job, proper pay, and a place to call home. A real home, for as long as you want it. This isn't just a place to weather a storm. It's family here. And you, Ilara, you've already proven you're one of us." Alara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. A single tear tracked a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. The offer, so unexpected, felt like a warm hand reaching out in the lingering cold of the storm. A place, a home. The words resonated deep within her, stirring a hope she hadn't dared to nurture. The crisp morning air, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, filled Ilara's lungs as she stood before Silas Boone. The silence stretched, broken only by a distant whinny. Her heart thrummed a nervous rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the quiet hope blooming within her. Silas, his gaze steady and unblinking, finally nodded. The offer stands, Alara. A roof over your head, 3 meals a day, and wages. Fair wages for an honest day's work. It won't be easy, but you'll earn your keep. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it threatened to buckle her knees. A real roof, not a canvas patch, not the sky. Food that wasn't scavenged or begged. A place. Her voice, when it came, was a little shaky. Yes, Mr. Boone, I accept. Thank you. Truly. He gave a curt nod, then turned to stride towards the main house. Come on then. Breakfast is almost ready. You can start by helping Martha with the dishes. Later that day, alone in the small, tidy room Martha had shown her, a simple cot, a sturdy pine dresser, and a window overlooking the sprawling fields, Alara took out the ring. It gleamed, a tiny circle of memory in her palm. For so long, it had represented her last desperate hope, a currency to stave off starvation. Now it was different. It wasn't about its worth in coin. It was about the warmth of her grandmother's hand, the quiet strength in her eyes. It was a promise to herself, to her grandmother, that she would make this new chance count. She slipped it onto her finger, feeling its familiar weight. It was a promise to herself, to her grandmother, that she would make this new chance count. Days turned into weeks, each one weaving Alara deeper into the fabric of the Bar M. She learned to knead dough until her arms ached, to coax stubborn embers into a roaring fire, and to identify the subtle signs of a cow nearing calving. Martha, initially reserved, softened under Alara's eager assistance and gentle nature, sharing recipes and stories over steaming pots. Alara found a surprising aptitude for mending tack, her nimble fingers repairing worn leather straps with a precision that impressed even Silas. She spent mornings in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh bread and simmering stews filling the air. Afternoons often found her in the barn, helping with the younger calves, or in the garden, coaxing vegetables from the rich soil. The men, gruff and weathered, came to appreciate her quiet efficiency. Jeb, the oldest ranch hand, taught her how to recognize a good horse from a poor one. Young Thomas, barely a man, would sometimes seek her out, sharing small jokes and the day's gossip. Alara laughed more often than she had in years. The fear, a constant companion for so long, began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. She was Alara Vance, and she had a place in the West. The ring on her finger was a constant, comforting presence, a reminder of where she had come from and the fierce joy of where she now stood.